If you want to lead your team to breakthrough results, that's breakthrough results, significantly different and better results, you've actually got to stop focusing on complexity and start thinking differently. Not easy to do. Going to explain it today. Some, and if we're being honest, most challenges, the real tricky ones, the real difficult ones, they do seem impossible. You do feel like the odds are stacked against you and there's nothing that you can do. And every solution that you can come up with seems to involve more time, more resources, more effort, more energy, more expertise, and all of that kind of stuff. But what if there was another way? Well, today we're going to learn from the beautiful game of chess. So before you turn off because you're not interested in chess, it's not about chess, right? But I'm Antonio, and today I'm going to be your leadership, not your chess coach, but your leadership coach over the next 30 to 40 minutes to explore how a different approach to complex problems can really help you unlock the kind of insight that leads to real breakthroughs. Why? Well, so that you can finally begin to stop managing and start leading. Before we dive in, before we get into chess, I just, listen, I'm not trying to sell you the book, but in the book, we have a lot about insight. And we talk about a whole bunch of insight lessons, insight moments, not only just for leaders, but like across the world. There's lots of them, and we're going to talk about a couple of them today. Why are they important? Well, because a leader's job is to improve results. Right? It's to solve problems and to help the organization significantly improve. And sometimes that needs that really elusive aha moment, right? That moment of insight. And you know, one of the best things about insights, which I actually love, it's like really hard to see, but then as soon as you do see it, it's kind of impossible not to see it. I'm going to give you one example. We talk about this in the book, and we'll talk about some others in a moment when we walk you through chess. Don't worry, it's nothing to do with chess. In the book, we talk about how a bus driver who was new to a route that he was assigned that day happened to take the wrong turn. Right, this is the distillation of the story. And instead of turning left or carrying on, he turned right. And in doing so, this was in the UK, by the way, you know those double-decker big red buses that you've seen? I have one over here made of Lego. And unfortunately, the bus was higher than the bridge that he went into was lower. Right, you get the idea. The bus wedged itself underneath a bridge. And thankfully, nobody was on the upper deck and, well, definitely would have been killed. So now we have a bus wedged under a bridge. It turns out that this bridge was a very, very old, antique Roman bridge, right? It was historic. It was, I'm not sure it was a UNICEF kind of historic monument of the world, right? But it was a very, very important, very ancient bridge. It was a Roman bridge, and it was one of those super high protected bridges. So nobody was allowed to dismantle this bridge. So now they're stuck with a bus that's stuck under a bridge, and they have to get the bus out from under the bridge without damaging the bridge. Everybody was more interested in not damaging the bridge than the bus. So the bus company made a lot of very frantic calls, and they got people from, this was in the UK, by the way, they got people from National Heritage and all of that kind of stuff, the architects and engineers, and they had people from the bus company with oxyacetylene torches to try and cut this bus out from under the bridge without damaging the bridge. Okay, big problem, expensive problem, potentially very damaging problem to the bridge. An 11-year-old boy was walking past the site, and he saw all the police cones and the police tape and all of that kind of stuff, and the crowd had been gathering for some time, and he was on his way back from school, and he asked the policeman, he said, like what's going on here. And the policeman said, move along, there's nothing to see, usual policeman type stuff. And the boy said, well, what is it? And the policeman explained that this bus had gone under this bridge and they're trying to cut this bus away without damaging the bridge, and it's a big problem, right? And there are people with sandbags, and there are people with hard hats on, and gear and scaffolding and belay ropes and all of that kind of stuff. And the boy said to the policeman, well, why don't they just let the air out of the tires and reverse the bus out? Which is actually, the policeman went, okay, hold on, that's quite a good idea. Went up to, I don't know, the chief engineer and says, there's a lad over here that says, why don't we just let the air out of the tires and reverse the bus out? Which is, of course, exactly what they did, which is how the little lad found himself in the local newspaper, because of course the newspaper was there. All to say that now you know that moment of insight, you go, yeah, well, why wasn't it obvious? Well, it wasn't obvious, was it? Because 50 people were crawling all over this bus and this bridge with slide rules and computers, right, to try and figure out the best way to take this bus apart, you know, in the easiest way without damaging the bridge. And that's the thing about aha moments. That's the thing about insight. They're not obvious until they're very obvious. And we talk about a lot of them in the book. Okay, so what's that got to do with the price, the weather and the price of fish? Insight is a muscle that can be developed. And what I'm hoping to do today is give you some ideas about how to do that, because the power of insight for leaders, you can't even measure it, right? In the book, we talk about shoes, and we talk about buses and bridges, and we talk about fish, and we talk about lots and lots and lots of things. Today I want to talk about chess, but remember, it's not about chess. Here's the thing about chess. I love chess because chess is a game where there's nothing hidden, right? Both of the people that are competing, if that's the right word, playing each other, right? They can see everything, right? There is nothing hidden from each other. Nothing relies on luck or the roll of a dice, right? Nobody gets any extra special powers that the other one doesn't get, right? Not like checkers where you can get to the end of the board and your piece becomes a queen and you start going all over the place. There's none of that, right? What you see is what you get for both sides. Now, the beauty of chess is it's a hugely sophisticated and complex game. And if you know how to play chess, you'll follow along easily. If you don't know how to play chess, you're just going to have to take some of my word for some of the numbers I'm about to share with you. They are astronomical. But for those of you that are very keen chess players, and I don't want to get it wrong, just let me refer to my notes because the numbers are going to blow your mind. In the first move, white always goes first, right? In your first move, there are 20 possible first moves. You don't need to know about chess, so stick with that. But there are 20 possible first moves, which are each of the pawns, and there are 8, can either move 1 square or 2 squares, right? So there's 8 of them, and each one of those can move in one of 2 ways. So that's 16 possible moves, and then you've got the knights, which can each do 2 different kinds of moves. So there's 4 for 2 knights. Anyway, all that to say, there are 20, but there are only 20 possible moves in the first move of chess. Okay, great. After white moves and black responds, it's gone from 20 to now there are 400 possible moves. Right, so white goes 20 moves, black goes through 20 moves. It's white's turn now, and there are possible 400 now new moves, potential moves. Okay, cool. But what about after 2 moves each? Well, after 2 moves each, there are 197,742 possible moves. Okay, cool. You can still kind of get your head around that maybe. But by move 3 each, right, there are over 121 million different moves. Okay, by move 10, and some of these games go on for like 60 moves, right? But by move 10, there are more possible moves than there are number of atoms in the observable universe. For real. Okay, so chess is tricky to say. Okay, chess masters, grandmasters, the best proponents of chess in the whole world spend decades decades and decades and decades, memorizing thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of possible patterns and permutations. So if you want to be at that grandmaster level, you have to really, really study hard and work hard at chess. So here's today's lesson. With all of that being said, remember all of that, here's today's lesson. A man, and I'll tell you who he is later, right? But a man decides that he wants to get a little bit better at chess. Not very good at chess, decides he wants to get better at chess. So he starts to try and figure out, are there any shortcuts to chess? Are there any kind of ways that I can get better, really, really good at chess really quickly, right? So didn't know chess, studied chess for about maybe a year, a little less than a year. And at the end of that year, decided to take on 9 of Britain's highest ranked, highest rated chess players and play them at a game. And he was convinced that he'd learned enough about chess that he could beat them. Now, of course, the highest rated grandmaster, I'll tell you his name in a second, when he heard about this challenge was, of course, outraged. It's preposterous. It's impossible that this newbie at chess, it's impossible he won't beat even one of us. Right? Because these were the highest, these were grandmasters, they were masters, and they were FIDE masters, which is a worldwide recognized standard for International Federation of Chess, right? These were like the best players in the whole of Great Britain. And this guy, who'd only been playing chess a year, had challenged them all to a game of chess and was convinced that he could beat them in a game of chess. Now, of course, after I told you there are 121 million permutations after move 3, I mean, it seems impossible, right? Like the guy's got no chance, right? So here's what happened. Remember these guys have been studying chess for decades. So you've probably seen where somebody like the grandmaster, right? The best chess players in the world, they will simultaneously play a bunch of people. They go around a room and they'll make a move, and then they'll go to the next board and make a move. They go all the way around. By the time they come back, their opponent has made a move, and they're simultaneously not only playing one game of chess, but they're playing like 20 games of chess, right? So they're not only keeping their game in their head, they're keeping like all of these. Okay, you get the idea. So the grandmaster said that this guy who had challenged them had 0 chance of winning one game. He didn't say there's a small chance or there is a minute chance. He said with great confidence, because I saw it, because this thing was filmed, and I'll tell you all about that later, there was 0 chance, but the challenger still remained confident. The TV showed up, the news showed up, and we watched the whole thing unfold. The game started where our challenger, playing in front of a board, made a move, went to the next one, made a move, went to the next one, made a move, and the TV were there, and they started asking the grandmasters and the highest rated people in the land, how's he doing? How's he doing? And after 3 or 4 moves, like the grandmaster said, I am playing another grandmaster. In other words, the guy that challenged him was as good as a grandmaster. All that to say, the game carried on. Here's what happened. You obviously know I wouldn't be telling you this if you got obliterated like 9. Here's what happened. By the end of the day, by the end of the game, our guy has 4 wins. So he beat 4, 3 losses, and 2 draws. Like, how is that even possible? He'd only been playing chess for less than a year. This is not what anybody expected from, let's face it, an amateur chess player who'd never even been to a chess tournament in his whole life. Think about how he might have done it. Before the game started, if you're thinking, well, he had an earpiece, right? He was somehow wired up to a computer. He was somehow using some kind of trickery or technology. There was none of that. The guy was checked for that. His ears were checked. His whole body was checked. They were very rigorous in making sure that this guy hadn't cheated. And he hadn't cheated. But what he had done is something, I'm trying to like hold off telling you because I'm trying to give you clues to it. He'd done something that nobody had expected. What he'd done was he had used a piece of insight to help him. The guy asked himself this question, which is the question I want to ask you in a minute as a leader. The guy asked himself this question. He said, is there a completely different way to approach this problem? Think about the boy in the bus, right? Is people climbing all over the bus with torches and stuff. And the boy, he didn't ask himself there's a completely different way to approach this problem, but he approached this problem in a completely different way. He knew nothing about the architecture, the bridges or buses, right? But he just went, well, why don't we do this? Okay? So there's a completely different way to think about this problem. Here's what he did. He made his first move with the first player, and then he saw how the player responded. He then moved on to the next table and made a move, and he saw how the person responded. And on the next table, maybe that person went first and then he went second. And basically what he did was he'd figured out that as he moved around the room, as he moved around the tables, that whenever this individual here, this table made a move, he memorized that move, so by the time he got halfway around the room, he played that move against this competitor. And then his response, he remembered that as he moved around the board, moved around the room, and he played that guy's response to this guy's move. Makes sense? What he did was he actually had all of these grandmasters playing against themselves. They weren't playing against him. They were playing against each other. And now you're thinking, oh yeah, well that's obvious. Well, it's obvious now because I told you, right? Because that aha moment, once you see it, you can't unsee it. So basically, player A, he repeated against player B on the other side of the room, watched player B's response to that, and then that was his response to player A, and then player A made his move, and then he repeated that around. They were actually each in opposite corners playing each other, and that was the genius of it, right? And so all of those millions of possibilities which those grandmasters had in their head kind of weren't that valuable in the end, were they? Because what this individual had done, he's figured out, is there a different way to play this game? And when, of course, he told the grandmasters what had happened, he kind of had to tell them because it was televised, right? It was on telly, right? They all went, oh, Cotus was cheating. But I'm okay with that because it's not really cheating, is it? It's finding a different way to play the game. And when we draw our model in a few minutes, I want us to think about that. Right? So let's just talk about our model just for a second. In every episode, well, nearly every episode, we draw a model. And all of the models that we draw are available for free, complimentary. Just go on our website, www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast, and somebody takes the model I'm about to draw, they make it all look super duper duper, download it, print it, put it on, on your wall in your office to remind you daily, is there another way to think about this? How do we build our insight model? The way we build our insight model is to actually start building our hindsight model. We talk a lot about this in the program. Every day we need a little bit of self-reflection. How did I do today? How could I have done a better job today? When I said or did this, could I have done or said something else to make me better? How would I improve my leadership scorecard? And before very long, within 2 weeks, no more, what'll happen is you'll start to, with a bit of hindsight, it'll start to affect your situational response, right? In the moment, it'll, as Alice likes to talk about it in our business, future Alice will thank me if I do this right now, right? So we'll use some hindsight to develop a little bit of situational insight. That situational insight leads to better foresight, and that allows us to recite the business. So hindsight, insight, foresight, and recite, and all of that good stuff. You don't need to remember that. All you need to remember is the constantly thinking, how could I have done that better? Knowing now what we know, what we'd have done differently next time. All of those kind of thinking patterns and thinking models start to build your insight, and take records of them. I digress because we're talking about chess, but what we're trying to figure out is that moment when everybody else says, of course, why didn't I think about that? And I'm going to give you a couple more examples, right? So here's the principle I'd like to think about just before we draw our model. You can kind of absorb it, draw it, show it to your people, draw it out for them in real time, and get the managers and the leaders of the organization trying to move towards that more insightful position. I'll show you that in a second. It's really, really important for you to spend time with a blank piece of paper figuring out how to change the rules of the game. Here's what it sounds like when you get it right. Why did we never think about this before, right? And the world is littered with those. Again, we talk about lots of them in the book, but let's keep going for now, okay? So it's about impossibility, or really possibility. It's about complexity. Let's draw our model, see where we get to. Okay, cool. So let me get that set up, and then we'll take it from there. I used to have a boss that said, look, let's try and sidestep complexity, and let's see where we can force multiply a result. So I'll just explain what he meant by that, and then I'll show you. If you're watching, Mike, thank you for this, right? Force multiplier, according to Mike, was, look, if you can imagine like a lever, like this, right? If the fulcrum's in the middle, whatever effort you put here, the result here are directly proportionate. So the amount of effort you put here, if the pivot's in the middle, whatever effort you put here is revealed here, right? It's a direct correlation between effort and result. What Mike said, and I think it was Aristotle. No, it wasn't Aristotle. Who was the Eureka guy? Archimedes. Archimedes said, if you give me a lever long enough and I can decide where the fulcrum goes, I can move worlds, right? Okay, if I give me a lever long enough and I can decide this point here, I can move worlds. It's a bit like, if you've ever been to a fairground and you've seen those things where you whack with a hammer, those targets, and then a weight zooms up a big pole and hits a bell at the top. What we're actually doing is they are pushing, you are hitting a lever that actually moves a lot on this edge, but just a tiny bit on this edge, right? So the thing goes hardly any way up towards the bell. And if you can move that lever, you could actually kind of knock the bell off the top of the thing. But anyway, what Mike was talking about when he said, how do we force multiply this? It was, how do we change the game such that a little movement here, right, on this end, right, a little movement here makes a huge movement over there. And this was kind of how he approached running business, how he approached leadership, right? He was always talking about force multiplying. And insight is a huge force multiplier. So bear that in mind as we draw our model. So what he said was leverage is the way that you compete with complexity. So leverage beats complexity. So let's do the complexity versus leverage model. So we want to defeat complexity with leverage, and the leverage gives us our aha moment. Okay, so down here we have complexity, and here's the thing. Most businesses have an enormous amount of complexity within them, right? I used to have another boss who said, in business, if it's complex and cumbersome, it's wrong. Not it's nearly always wrong, not it might be wrong. It was an absolute. If it's complex and cumbersome, it's wrong. If it's simple and elegant, it's right. And what he meant was, and he constantly talked about simplify, simplify, simplify. And if somebody came to him and said, hey boss, here's our problem, should we do this complex solution or should we do this simple solution? He would always go for the elegant, go for the thing that's most beautifully designed, right? Elegance and simplicity always defeats complexity. And the thing about businesses is they seem to be complexity magnets, right? They seem to have their own gravitational complexity. Things get more and more complex all of the time, mainly because people are working in silos and they're just trying to fix their own immediate problem. They don't think about the ramifications of other parts of the business, right? So, which is why one of the best ways to kill complexity is with collaboration. So all of those silos get beaten down. Not invented here syndrome, no sacred cows, all of that's a thing of the past, but that's a video for another day. So let's just think about complexity. Complexity here, low. So things in the business are simple, right? Or complexity high. In other words, it is complex. And we don't want complex worlds, but we recognize that we do live in a complex world. So, whilst ever we can, we need to simplify, 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 to only to the extent that it's possible to do so. After that, we need some more intelligent solutions, more insight, right? So we should always look for simple, simplify, 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 speed up, design it, elegance, right? And all of that kind of stuff. There will come a point of diminishing return, and then we have to get into, well, different ways of thinking about it, right? Insight. Okay, so then let's have a look up here. Up here we look at solutions approach, right? Solution approach. So think about it this way. Think about it in terms of direct competition. The reason I say this is your organization and my organization and every organization, we don't operate in a vacuum, right? We have competitors who are trying to take a larger part of the market share. If the pie isn't getting any bigger, then what do we have to do as leaders? We have to figure out how to slice the pie up differently, right? What does that mean? That means we've got to either assertively or aggressively or intelligently take market share of our competitors, right? That's what our aha moments, our insights all about. Okay, so direct competition and indirect leverage, right? In other words, how can we change the game that we're not just toe-to-toe fight, head-to-head fight with all of our competitors? Okay, so let's think about your business. Let's think about where you are on this map, and let's see if we can't move you to a different point of this map. Most of our models, what we try and do, so I'll put it here up front so you can figure it out, is move to a place called up and to the right. So I'm not asking you to introduce more complexity in that. What I am saying is get to the point where you've driven out as much of the complexity as possible, and then how do we deal with the complexity in a different way? So just to be clear, okay? Low, simple business, direct competition. This is I'm just going to call this the obvious zone, and I'll tell you why in a second, right? Because what most businesses do is when they're in the business, the solutions are kind of a bit blunt instrument, a bit simple against our direct competitors, right? What does that look like? Well, it just kind of looks like drop price in a competitive market. Well, that doesn't take a whole lot of genius, right? I think the answer is simple. I think the results are dreadful, right? If you're in a competitive market, if you're in a commodity market, dropping the price, it might work. It's a blunt instrument. The solution is simple. Just drop the price. But actually, the results are poor. So that's not a way to go, right? Now, the reason that people quote unquote like this or default to this is because the people around it think, right? Well, this is manageable. In other words, it don't take a lot of wit and intelligence to kind of say, okay, well, we don't know what to do. The price is aggressive. We're in a commodity market. Maybe it's getting even more competitive. We're going to have to drop price to keep share. That's the obvious zone, right? Like that doesn't take any wit to think about that. So don't do that. We got to think about a different way to play. Okay, So what some people do then when they're competing with that is they move up here, and I'm going to call this the over-engineered zone. The over-engineered zone is, okay, we make mousetraps. Let's figure out if we can make a brand new mousetrap. Tricky. Lots of R&D, time. Then we have a whole Ansof's matrix about new products, new market. Like, it's risky. It's all of that kind of stuff. And basically it relies on managers and everybody saying to each other, look how innovative we are. The thing about that, certainly in terms of products and services, it's expensive, it takes a lot of time, it's high in risk, dangerous, right? Okay, what about the bottom right hand corner? This is another, this is what I'm going to call the expert trap. This is where most leaders get stuck, right? So most get stuck here. Most get stuck here. Because they know they don't want to play that reducing the price to compete game, because that just always ends in a bad place, right? So what they do is they try and out-expert the experts, right? It's better than, like, let's just reduce our price, right? Real simple solutions to complex problems. Not really going to work. But the trouble with this, where most get stuck, is that try to out-expert the experts, right? Their direct competitors. That basically, we need more, ... What do we need more of? We need more specialists, we need more data, we need more time, we need more money, more people, more effort, more energy, more, right, resources. That's a difficult and dangerous place to play as well. Expensive too. But let's move up here into the insight zone. The insight zone, think about our guy playing chess. By the way, it was Derren Brown, D-E-R-R-I-N, Derren Brown. You can check it out on YouTube. It's genius, right? How he had all the grandmasters playing against each other. So if you think about it, he kind of changed the game. And you might go, okay, well, what's that got to do with business? Well, think about Uber. What did Uber do? Uber changed the game of rideshare, but taxis, right? Here was the issue with taxis. You would call, if you're as old as I am, you'll remember these days when you would call, telephone, with one of those round things, right? In the dial, you would telephone a taxi company and you say, can I have a cab for the airport, please? And the guy would go, yeah, sure, I'll be there in 10 minutes. And 10 minutes kind of dragged its backside round to 10 minutes and there was no taxi. And you would call the taxi company and you would say, where's my taxi? And the guy would go, oh yeah, mate, he's just round the corner, right? We'd play that game forever, and then sometimes it wouldn't even show and it was an absolute nightmare. What did Uber do? Listen, all Uber did was they plotted where the taxi is on a map, but it changed the world. Because you know what, we're kind of okay to wait so long as we can go onto our app and see the car moving towards us in real time. That makes us very patient. They applied this principle all over the world. If you've ever been on a subway lately, you'll see the sign that basically says next train arrives in 7 minutes. 6 minutes, 5 minutes, and just knowing when it's coming makes us very patient. We're much more relaxed about waiting so long as we know it's definitely on its way. Same with Uber. So what did Uber do? They took an incredibly complex world and they changed the game to the extent that, here's the thing about the insight, we know we've got it when we start saying, well, why didn't anyone think of this before? Why didn't anyone think of this before? Because the thing about aha moments, the thing about insight is as soon as we see it, you can't unsee it. And you think, well, why didn't everybody think of that? Because they just don't. Because most of them get stuck in the over-engineered zone, in the obvious zone, and in the expert trap zone. And nobody tries to get into the insight zone. Bruce Lee right, who you may have heard of, his expression for this is the best way to avoid a punch is to not be there, right? Or rather, the best way to deal with the punch is to not be there, right? It's obvious when you say it. If you can't hit the guy that you're fighting with, you're never going to win, right? Okay, so all the boy with the bus, the people with batter shoes, Netflix, Blockbuster think of, Kodak think of, Uber think of, right? All of the world is littered with these aha moments, but just nobody spends time trying to develop that muscle. And as a leader, it's your muscle to develop. All right, let's just take a moment just for a quick pit stop. If this is your first time, hello, welcome. I'm Antonio Garrido. I'm the founder of My Daily Leadership. I'm a long-time leadership coach, a serial entrepreneur. I wrote this book and some others, and another one's coming out soon that I'm writing with my daughter Alice. I'm the guy who spent way too much time thinking about why so many of the people I've coached get stuck managing bottom left-hand corner of this model, or top left-hand corner, or bottom right-hand corner, when they could and should be leading the organization top right-hand side of this corner. And when we launched this podcast, we had one simple goal, and that's to help busy, ambitious leaders like you stop putting out fires and start future-proofing the organization with a few insight moments which are absolutely critical. And we want to give you practical tools, even to tricky solutions and stuff that you can start using tomorrow. So if you are finding value in what we've heard so far and what we talk about, please think about if we're getting close to something useful, hit the follow button, like, subscribe, comment. Just let us know how we're doing. Let us know what you need more of, and we'll do it. And it really does help more people like you find us more easily. So do that, please. If you like any of these doodles and they're useful to you, do just jump on our website and download them. They're 100% free to download. www.mydailyleadership.com/podcast. Don't say we don't give you anything for nothing. Okay, so back to this model. So some questions to think about for yourself. Here's where we're going to start developing your insight model by having you look at your hindsight model, right? Looking backwards. So question number one is, I think, the visibility question. Where are we trying to master complexity, right? Bottom left, obvious zone. Top left, over-engineered zone. Bottom right, expert trap, right? Instead of orchestrating around it. So where are we trying to master complexity? Think about the bus under the bridge instead of orchestrating around it. Good. Question two, it's more of like a systems question. It's the art, what I like to call the architecture question. What's the structure of this challenge that we're not seeing, right? Let's kind of try and look below the surface. I don't have time to tell you how we did this in a really commoditized workspace that I used to work in, which was bricks. I mean, I can't imagine a world other than paper clips, more of a commodity than bricks. And we figured that out for bricks. If you can figure it out for bricks, I don't know what you sell, but you can figure it out for your business. So what's the structure of this challenge that we're not seeing? Think about that. Question three, the leverage question. Do you remember that? How do we force multiply our way through this? What existing resources could we connect differently to solve this problem? Remember, we're trying to move into the insight zone. So that's the leverage question. What effort here can produce massive results over here? Number four, the simplicity question. What would this look like if it were embarrassingly simple? Remember Derren having the chess masters play against each other? And there's a bunch more in the book, right? Number five, the insight question. Are we playing chess or are we playing the chess players? Genius. Derren wasn't actually playing chess, was he? He was playing the chess players, if you think about it. Give that some thought. That'll keep you awake tonight. Number six, the reframe question. If we can't or shouldn't or mustn't compete directly, how would we approach this? So if we couldn't, wouldn't, shouldn't, mustn't compete directly, because that's a hard game. Let's play a different game. How would we approach this differently? You know, it's time to start drawing and thinking outside the box and doing some brainstorming. Okay, I think that's enough for today. I think that's enough for now. A big thank you for being here. As always, I do hope this episode offered you something of value, even if it's just one tool, one tip, one thought that maybe improves your leadership ability by 1%. I'm happy with that. Remember, there's immense power in marginal gains consistently applied over time. It's how compound interest works, and that's what Einstein said was the eighth wonder of the world, and you can't argue with that guy. So please be sure to like, follow, and subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes like this one, and tell us in the comments. That would be great. What more to say? I'm Antonio Garrido from My Daily Leadership. Thanks for tuning in. Until next time, by wisdom and effort, see you soon.